transformational shift in terms of what was possible, 2017, 2018, 2019. And then that would ultimately end up in a sort of software-driven world.
Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models. This podcast expresses our views as of the date published and does not represent the views of and is not endorsed by any company for which we work. Before we get to the episode, Laura and I are excited to announce a partnership with Overlap. Fresh out of Y Combinator's summer batch, Overlap is an AI-driven app that uses large language models to curate the best moments from podcast episodes. Imagine having a smart assistant who reads through every podcast transcript, finds the best parts or parts most relevant to your search, and strings them together to form a new, curated stream of content. That is what Overlap does. I personally use Overlap to explore content on future podcast guests and highly recommend it as another diligence tool for investors. Check out Overlap on the App Store today.
Today we are chatting with Everett Cook, co-founder and CEO at Rho. Prior to Rho, Everett spent a decade as a portfolio manager at multiple macro hedge funds. Then in 2018, Everett launched Rho, a financial operating platform for fast-growing businesses. Welcome, Everett.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So before starting Rho, you had a very successful Wall Street career as a macro investor at various hedge funds, as we mentioned. To start, we thought it would be interesting maybe to touch on how macro investing at big hedge funds work, just at a high level, and kind of what your role as a junior and then senior PM consisted of.
Yeah, so I spent about 10 years in finance, spending most of that in global macro investing as an analyst, senior analyst, and then briefly as a PM. I was never like a huge portfolio manager, but spent a very long time working with some of the best people in that industry. And I got drawn to it, first of all, because I started in finance, in leverage finance out of college. And this was during the great financial crisis. And it was interesting to me to watch a lot of really smart people lose a lot of money really quickly. And for something that seemed pretty understandable and predictable. And I sort of zoomed out and I was like, who are the people that actually saw this coming, understood it, made money from it? And there was this whole category of investors called global macro investors that really understood macroeconomic trends and how they impacted the broader economy. And 9 out of 10 of them had their best year ever, those years, because they understood what was coming, whereas I think a lot of the other people that were, more myopic sort of missed it. So I really wanted to go into that world. I finished my analyst stint and worked for a very small fund, and then worked for what's now known as Point72, at the time was SAC, and then worked for a $1 billion fund, a $2 billion fund, and then as a PM at a larger platform. I got to work with a number of really great traders, some of the best people in the world in the space. And what was really interesting about it was, first of all, like traders are weird. They're like founders, right? It's not one thing. They're all different. One guy may be, phenomenal at risk. One guy may be an amazing analyst. Obviously, like the best people are, understand every part of it. But like building companies, it's always changing. The landscape's always changing. The person that wins is the person that's adapting fastest to whatever is the change in the world that's happening. But for me, what was really similar and where I felt like I could make the transition was because it was really about understanding what in the world is changing and really having a broader picture and being able to zoom out better than other people. In global macro, probably more so than any other investment style, there is no real informational advantage. We're all playing from the same cards for the most part. There is no like, oh, I got this call from the Fed and they told me what they're going to do. Like that, there are people there are rumors of that. That doesn't happen. And even if it did, it wouldn't really help you that much. So it's really about like seeing the bigger picture more clearly than everybody else, right? Seeing the picture, the pieces come together and understanding where the market has biases and where the market is ultimately like crowding and hurting. And, how do you understand something that 9 out of 10 people don't? And that's very similar to starting a company, right? Especially when you're starting out, there aren't necessarily really big secrets. It's about understanding technology trends. And okay, this is changing, right? Here's a foundational technology that's changing. And what does that power? And, the obvious answer is usually not the right one, but it's like, how do you understand that second order? And then how do you move really fast to execute? And so there's actually a pretty long history of founders that have similar backgrounds to me that made that transition, because while the hard skills are not the same, the soft skills are, that the critical thinking, the sort of understanding investment markets and how broader shifts impact, sort of micro.
And we're definitely going to dive deeper into fintech and how we went from macro to starting Rho. But can you just touch on your experience working with Mike Bloomberg? That's very fascinating.
Yeah.
And we'd love to hear how that inspired some of your interest in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it was an amazing opportunity. I was really lucky to have at a really early age. And that's probably what inspired me really to be an entrepreneur. At a really young age, I really wanted to work. I loved business, and I didn't want to go play with my friends in the summer. I wanted to get a job, and I was able to sort of talk myself into a really sort of very low low risk job from their perspective at Bloomberg at the time. I was the youngest employee there, probably still probably hold that record for a summer. And anyway, I went in, they kind of put me in the corner. They were like, here, just watch a bunch of videos, and they cataloged them. I came back 2 weeks later, and I was like, I built a database for you guys, like to manage all this stuff. Like, okay, you're kind of useful. And so anyway, I stuck around for a long time through the campaign, and then for the first 6 months in City Hall. But for me, it was amazing just as an opportunity to really see, one of the best founders, entrepreneurs of all time, right? And get a front row seat into someone operating that caliber, which is, again, I think Mike is one of the greatest founders of all time. I know people don't think about him in the same sort of, tech world, versus like Zuckerberg or Jobs, but he is right. He's absolutely up there and has built a company that is like that size.
Yeah.
For me, it was really fascinating because, number one, you appreciate the humanity of someone like that. Like he's not a superhuman. He's a person, right? He puts on his shoes.
Yeah.
And he's very down to earth. And, he built an incredible company. And he did it by understanding that there was a technological shift happening, right? Understanding that finance was going to move towards computers, towards digital. He had an advantage in terms of having, better understanding of that from his prior role at Salomon Brothers. And then he built a phenomenal culture around it once he sort of had that MVP product in the market, and never stopped. And never took money from VC either, which is
which we'll get into as
rare.
well.
Yeah. For me, that was amazing just to be able to see, just to be able to be, 10 feet away and see what's happening there, because at a really young age, I was like, well, I want to do that. I have no, belief that I can approach anything close to what he's accomplished. But it's amazing that a human being can even do that. And that was always what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you leave the PM role 2017, 2018 to start a company. And one of the first things that you have to do, which Will did for us, was set up a bank account. And you ran into a problem. What did you want to start initially? And then what happened when you were like, oh crap, this is harder than what I thought?
Yeah, so that's right. I left the fund I was at. I talked about market changes. There were a couple of interesting market changes that I thought were happening that I wanted to take advantage of and build a company around. So first, I didn't leave with a divine inspiration. And I think that there's this myth that, if you're, and I don't, you guys talk to more founders than I do probably, but I think there's this myth that you're going to have this perfect idea when you leave your company, and you're going to go start your company. You're going to resign one day and start the company the next day, and everything's going to be laid out. Maybe that happens for some people. Definitely didn't happen for me. And my perspective was, if I'm going to spend the next 10, maybe longer years building a company, I want to make sure that it's something that I believe in, that I care about, and that I have really put in work into the why before I say, let's go down this journey. So I left. I spent about 3 months trying to figure out what was interesting and what did I want to do. And I thought the initial idea that I had was, well, Instagram is growing really fast, and it's going to redefine the way that consumer products are sold and made and delivered. And this was the very beginning of sort of the direct-to-consumer boom, which ended up in a sort of a bust after that. But so it was probably a good miss. But step one, formed an LLC. I was like, I'm going to do some business projects. And then step two, open a bank account. And I got to step two, and I kind of got stuck. It's wasted a day and a half trying to open a bank account. I was like, why is this hard? I was an early adopter of fintech solutions like Simple and some of the wealth management sort of fintechs, and had friends that were early employees at SoFi and some of the early fintechs at that time. And kind of stuck in my head. And then I kept going. I was like, okay, well, I did get it open. It didn't totally block me. It was just a waste of a day. But but it didn't need to be like that. Tried to work on a couple of D2C projects. Realized that wasn't necessarily my strength. And then I kept getting asked by other founders about fintech. And like
Yeah,
everyone
what'd
was,
you use? What'd you do?
yeah. And just like everyone was fascinated with fintech. All these people that had done other things like ad tech and stuff like that, they were like, they were like, oh, this is this thing. And I don't know anything about finance. I was like, well, I actually know something about that. So maybe this is like the universe pulling me in this direction. And we sat down and had a brainstorming session, and I talked to a number of entrepreneurs, and like, what's broken? And they were like, man, like business banking is just terrible. Like, and I was like, oh yeah, like I had that experience, a month ago. Like it was really tough. Why is this so bad? And why is like every other piece of software, every other piece of technology that I touch, feel new? And then this feel like I'm going back in time, like 10 years longer, right?
Yeah.
So that was sort of the inspiration. We started building there with the simple view of like what makes just the best bank account in the world. And then we built that, or what we believed that was the case. But what we realized was the best bank account in the world isn't a bank account. It's really a system. And it's a system for operating and organizing your finances as a company. And so all those things that people were doing outside the bank account, like bill pay, like expense management, like corporate cards, those needed to come in. And it needed to be one platform that you could use and that you wouldn't have to touch anything else as a finance person, as a founder, as an accountant. And that's really what's the inspiration for Rho. There's a big vision, and some people were like, you're crazy, like this is a good idea, but you're never going to get that far. But here we are 7 years later, continuing to hack away at it.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. And you touched on how you built out the product and the natural extensions of the banking platform. Obviously, as a seed Series A now, Series B, post Series B business, resources are scarce, right? You only have so much capital. You have to make your capital go as far as it can. How do you go about deciding what is the next project or the next piece of the product that you should work on? How does that prioritization process work?
I mean, look, I think that's true at any stage. No matter how many people or resources you have, you're always systematically constrained because companies can only do a couple things really well, even if you're Microsoft, right? For us, we have a phenomenal product management team that spends all day kind of thinking about those problems. Earlier on, when we didn't have that, it was really about just talking to customers. And actually, really early on when we first started, we knew that there was a huge spectrum of things that we did not have. And we were like, what do we do first? And we would actually go out and pitch customers on our product, pitch customers that were larger than our ICP because we wanted to go up market. And we just had a spreadsheet and we were like, why'd they say no? And we would just mark it down. And whichever kind of had the highest score and the lowest, difficulty rating, we would just do first. And then we kept working down that list over time. Again, eventually kind of became product management, became more professional. But it was really that simple. It was just talking to our users day in, day out.
Yeah, very customer-centric.
What did you start with the initial wedge of Rho?
The initial wedge of Rho was just better business banking. And it was opening a business bank account online, for startups. And it was interesting because when we started, it was 2019. It was October 2019 was when we launched the product. And, we would market it and we would talk to customers. We did a lot of community stuff. We did a lot of meetups in New York. And, about half the time we'd hear, well, like there's a Chase branch like by my, right down the street from me. And I was like, okay, but you don't want to spend your day there. Like, like do this online. This is 2019. We're pretty far along at this point. And then 3 months later, right, COVID happens and, everything's shut. And, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can do this all online now. I don't have to. Like, you don't have a choice. We're the only game in town.
Had to do it online. Yeah.
So, we went like this. It was really exciting. But then even after that, right, like we never got that question again. It was never like, oh, I want to go to branch. Everyone realized they didn't have to do that. The behavior had changed. COVID had fundamentally shifted people's perception of what you had to do, physically. And the world was never going to go back. But that was, initially that was very hard for people to do outside of, us and a few other people that were early.
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting point that I'd love to touch on, which is just trying to understand why is this an area that's better suited for a technology company as opposed to a larger financial institution like a Chase, which is obviously part of JP Morgan, as our other retail brick and mortar banks, right? Why should this be a tech solution?
First of all, it's not purely a tech solution, right? We partner with banks to deliver products and services, and among them business banking. So today we partner with Webster Bank, which is a $70 billion bank based in Connecticut. And they do what they're excellent at, which is risk management, balance sheet management, et cetera. And then we deliver technology that the customer, touches and feels. Banks are not technology companies and technology companies are not banks. And I think that's really important. I think most banks would agree with that too. Their expertise is not building great products. Building a product organization, building great software is really hard, right? You guys see it every day in your portfolio and companies that you meet, founders that you meet. It's a organizational skill that is very different than what exists at banks, even the largest banks. And just because they have thousands and thousands of engineers doesn't mean they can build better products. And that's it's a pure, sort of innovator's dilemma type thing, right? It's the same with startups, right? Just because, Microsoft, Google, have lots of engineers doesn't mean that they can build everything or build it better necessarily.
Yeah.
So I think it's really about that, about like just deeply understanding your user, maybe picking one of them, where we don't do consumer banking, we don't do, like mortgages, all these other things that a bank kind of has to do.
Yeah.
We really focus on one lane, and then we're building software because we believe that software is really what adds value to customer experience. And then the bank really like owns the back end of ultimately the payments, the money storage, stuff like that.
Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Laura and I are thrilled to announce a partnership with Grata, an intuitive deal sourcing and diligence platform. Keep missing out on private market deals? Ditch the Rolodex and get Grata. Grata's AI-powered platform provides accurate data, deep insights, and time-saving workflows that help get more deals done. And it's trusted by over 500 firms and 3,000 deal makers, including myself. I've personally used Grata in both my deal sourcing and diligence workflows and would recommend their tool to any investor across private equity, growth equity, corp dev, or investment banking. We've negotiated a special offer for our audience. Mention PartnerPath to the Grata team during sign-up, and you'll get free executive seats for your partners and MDs included in your subscription. Now, back to the episode.
Obviously, there are other tech solutions that are taking on the consumer banking side, right? Like a Chime or other various neobanks. So I think that begs the question, looking forward, what do you think the outlook is for big banks like a JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America, where obviously you guys are taking business from them or some type of value that would otherwise accrue to them on the commercial banking side? They're getting attacked on the consumer banking side. It almost seems like some of these big financial institutions are dying a death by 1,000 cuts. What will they continue to excel in? You mentioned risk management among a couple of other things, but what's your perspective on the long-term outlook for a lot of these big players?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple things. I don't think they're going anywhere soon. I think that they will start to partner more frequently with fintech companies. Some may buy some, but I think there'll be more of a partnership. I think fintech and banks went through a couple phases over the past, decade or so, right? First, the banks were like, well, this is too small to matter. Like nobody cares. And then fintech valuations, during the bubble were like, just insane. And it was sort of the other way. And now I think it's more, look, let's meet in the middle and let's figure out how to build a better solution for our customers. The banks recognize that they're not software companies. The fintechs recognize that they need to work with good banks and really good banks, not just like these little regional banks that I think people had worked with. Sorry, not regional, but community banks that some of the fintech companies had built on top of.
Yeah.
And I was like, look, if you're going to build a premium grade product, you need to work with a premium grade bank that actually is well regulated, understands this product, understands this space, like our partner today. And so I think that it's a positive relationship over time. I think that there are areas that will move more towards fintech. I don't think that fintech will ever be big balance sheet lending. There's no competitive advantage as a fintech to do that. I don't think that fintechs, on the consumer side, I think there's segments. I think that the prime segments, I think will still be hard for fintech to crack. I haven't seen that happen yet. Maybe they will. But I think segments where the banks struggle to serve and struggle to do really well, those will ultimately be, fintechs will be doing them, and then fintechs will be hopefully doing them in partnership with great banks. And I think over time, that's ultimately how it progresses. I do think that there'll be a hollowing out of like the mid-tier banks. They'll either be excellent at lending and be earning their NIM that way and really not making much on the other side, or they won't necessarily be there. Banks end up sort of, looking like credit hedge funds in a lot of ways, right? They're putting credit out there, they're borrowing, but they don't necessarily have a thriving retail business outside the sort of the top couple.
Do you think there's room for any brick and mortar presence in the banking future in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I do actually. I think that it's really interesting. I mean, you see some banks that are pulling back from it, and just not investing. Other banks like PNC, who I actually have a ton of respect for, I think it's an exceptionally well-managed bank, are investing $1.5 billion in brick and mortar. There's definitely like return on that investment. There's customers that care about that. There are also just customers that care about like workflow software and process optimization and stuff like that, and accounting integrations and doing all those things really well. So I think that there's room for both, just like, direct to consumer, right? 7 years ago, people were like, oh, like retail's gonna be dead. Like it's just going to disappear. Like no, you're going to walk down Madison Avenue and it's going to be empty.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it evolved. There's some stuff that you buy online. There's some stuff that you buy in stores, and there's the use of stores today is probably different than it was 10 years ago because it's more about showcasing the brand as opposed to necessarily, hey, like walking into the store to buy, a stapler or something like that you buy on Amazon. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's true in this space as well.
Do you think that any of the digitally native banks will ever get into brick and mortar presence? Will we be able to walk into a Rho bank?
I don't know. It's probably not like a venture scale sort of like return on investment. Maybe one for marketing purposes, but probably not in the near term.
Yeah, got it.
I guess when you think about, we've touched on the big bank side of the market and where they play, and I guess Rho, generally speaking. But what about, it's become a highly competitive space, and I think it's a big market, so there probably can be a few winners. But how do you think about differentiating from some of the other players like Brex and Ramp? And I also know that their initial wedge was like a little bit different than Rho's.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all started around the same time. I think we all understood that there was a transformational shift in terms of what was possible, 2017, 2018, 2019. And then that would ultimately end up in a sort of software-driven world. I have a lot of respect for all those companies. I think some of them led the way, some of them are, were later. But for us, we think about it as like, look, number one, yes, it's a really big space. And, if you actually count it, it's probably the biggest TAM across the board. Number two, we think about it around our customers. We're just like, we talk to our customers, we're customer obsessed, we're not competitor obsessed. For us, it's really understanding where there are problems that we can solve and solutions that we can deliver. And yeah, like for them, I think we have a couple things that are different philosophically. We started with business banking. Both of them started as cards. Brex now does business banking. I wouldn't be surprised if other people start doing that. In addition, for us, we really believe that customer service is a integral part of customer experience. And it's not something that should be sort of an afterthought. That's probably one of the biggest differences that we see. We believe in having the best product, having the best pricing, and also delivering it with the world's best customer service. And that's something that probably, other folks have a different philosophy on than we do.
How can you differentiate from the customer service standpoint? And how do you know when you're spending too much versus not enough time with the customer, especially as you've been around for a while, but still a lean team?
Yeah, you never want customer service to be your requirement. You never want people to have to reach out to do something or have to, you always want the product to solve the problem. That said, when you are dealing with people's money, there is a heightened sense of sensitivity and there's a desire to talk to someone fairly frequently. And so we think about it as like from we have a multi-tiered model in terms of how we structure those teams and how we deliver that service. We don't use BPOs, we don't outsource it, but it is cost effective because the product is generally able to solve all the problems, but sometimes our team is there to help them understand sort of where, how to use it themselves. And then they have to go back to our designers and be like, hey, we have this, but it wasn't intuitive enough. How do we make that more intuitive? That way we have less of those tickets. So those things also just support each other, right? Customer service is part of our product org and it supports our product. Their goal is to make that go down. But you hope that nobody needs it. You want to make sure that when someone interacts with your organization, it's an A+ every time. And so that's how we think about it.
Yeah, it sounds like some of the AI customer service companies might not be the best fit for a fintech.
I don't know. We'll see. I think I'm optimistic on that side. I think that it'll be an evolution. The more of the low-level stuff that can be automated gives your team more time and bandwidth to solve sort of more complicated problems. But yeah, I think overall, there is still a premium put on being able to interact with a human on the other side.
Do you have a view on, I know this is a slight tangent, but there's been a lot of venture money going into folks like Sierra and Decagon and their customer support, customer service, AI agents. If you think back 5-10 years, there was a lot of capital invested in customer service AI. Right. Which there's a lot of products out there, Intercom, Core AI. There are a lot of folks that already provide quote unquote customer service AI. Do you have a view on whether investment in this new agentic world and that product use case will kind of come to fruition, or
I think so. I mean, I'm really excited about it. Yeah, we've explored all of them. We're really excited about that space. I think that again, it allows our team to ultimately up level what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful. I mean, the foundational models are evolving so quickly that I think that it's natural that you'll see more agentic solutions in the future. But again, we think about it as look, where's the market today? Where's it going to be in a year or 2 years? How do we position there, as we continue to kind of move forward? We'll think longer term as well. Right now, no, it's not quite there. I think you can tell, right? It generally fails the Turing test, but we're getting closer.
Maybe it would be good to touch on the interest rate cycle and how you've seen that affect Rho from a go-to-market standpoint and just value proposition for your existing customers.
Yeah, so we're influenced by that, and I think that the way that we've thought about it is, we have a cash management business and a spend management business. Cash management is business banking. Spend management is corporate cards. For us, when rates go up, generally speaking, the cash management side does better, and also we're able to deliver more value back to customers in terms of by giving them treasury solutions. So founders that are sitting on millions of dollars of cash, can earn,
4 or 5%.
Yeah, exactly. So that becomes really attractive to people who, where that money may have been sitting somewhere else, not doing anything. But our margin on our cards goes down a bit because we have to borrow for that. And then on the other side, when rates go down, vice versa. We try to build a sort of a more somewhat balanced business. It may shift sort of one way or the other a little bit, but ultimately we believe like both of those things are important, both for the end user as well as for the business model to make sure that we're not super, impacted by interest rates, regardless which direction they're moving.
Right. Which I'm sure your experience as a macro investor helps you position a little bit, sooner maybe than.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more trying to like not take risk. Like my perspective is like I did that before. I'm sort of done. I retired from that world. So my goal is always obsessing about like how do we avoid taking a view on that stuff, or how do we avoid taking risk on things that are macro and focus on just like building a business. But you actually have to think about it if you're going to avoid it. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of, whipsawed by it.
Right. And I know, Everett, you've done a couple other podcasts where you've touched on high level your ICP and the type of customer that you target. It's typically right when you're starting to think about bringing on a CFO or a fractional CFO, right? Going from one person business to a couple people. Is an interesting inflection point. But I think it'd be helpful to chat through your ICP and how you decided to target that ICP. Obviously, you're focused on fast-growing, small, medium-sized businesses across various verticals. Maybe just start with why focus on smaller businesses with high growth, and what was the thought process there?
So, today Rho spans a pretty wide spectrum. So we work with companies that are literally just getting started, day zero, to 10,000 plus person companies with hundreds of locations across the country and everything in between. But for us, we think like the companies that get the most value out of Rho are those ones that are just starting to hit some inflection, and really because we're able to give them sort of a full financial operating system that they can take out of the box and have day one, and ultimately solve those problems that they're experiencing around spend management, around managing their capital, around closing their books faster. So ultimately, that's where we see that need the most acute. But really, like we love starting with companies like when they just get started too, and the platform can be self-service, and they can sign up and just go all the way through. And ultimately, that way, when they do hit that inflection point, they're ready.
Is it difficult to build for a self-service customer as well as an enterprise customer?
Yeah, it is. It's a particularly unique challenge that our product managers have to kind of figure out every day. There's definitely like an overlap. If you think of it as like a Venn diagram, right? And it's like, what does that enterprise customer want? What does that smaller SMB want? And how do we make sure that the product works together? We try to frame it as like at Rho, and this is part of our mission statement internally, is that we're trying to build the simplest and most powerful product in our category. And simple meaning like you can use it out of the box. Like if you were to start a company tomorrow, like sign up for Rho, easier than Chase or than some of the other fintech companies. But if you're scaling, it's not going to break. You're not going to have scaling problems, and ultimately you're going to be able to have your permissions that are as granular as you want, right? So if you're big companies, they get very granular in terms of like who's allowed to do what, how do we like do permissions? If you're allowed to spend, who has to approve it, who has to approve that, several chains down, et cetera. So yes, making all that work together in sort of a single user experience that's cohesive is a challenge, but that's why we hire really smart people. But ultimately, you really believe that simplicity is universal. Everybody wants a simple product. They just want to be able to do the thing. So yeah, that's
right. How would you describe, or what would you describe as a business that's outside of your ICP or who you try to focus on? Because I know you focus more on tech companies, obviously fast-growing businesses, as we mentioned.
Yeah.
But also there are different types of businesses where they're brick and mortar retail businesses versus tech companies. How do you think of what you might not want to focus on and why?
We don't have a ton of brick and mortar retail. We don't touch cash. So if you're a company that takes cash, that can be tough.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, it's like professional services type, office type businesses, whether you're in tech, if you're an architect, if you're in finance, there are lots of categories where we have lots of sort of space. But generally speaking, it's that. Yeah, we don't have a ton of like brick and mortar, and then we also work with lots of accountants. So that's sort of another ICP for us is accountants and accounting firms where they may have 10 or 100 clients, and they're managing that, they're juggling that. We build product for them as well. So we build product that helps them manage their client portfolio inside Rho ultimately close their clients' books more efficiently. And those span like tons of different industries, dentists or, or tech companies or anything above. So it's really a universal problem that we're solving. There's definitely certain market segments where we have just better access, better connectivity. They're generally early adopters, but we believe the whole market is our TAM, really. It's just focusing on one thing at a time.
Yeah. And I think one interesting trend that would be interesting to touch on is the evolution of vertical software and why you think banking and cash management, spend management shouldn't be included in this business in a box type trend. Right.
There's a couple reasons. And I think this was sort of our like anti-thesis when we started the company, because at the time it was very sort of in vogue. There was going to be, banking and spend for X, Y, Z for every vertical.
Right. For barber shops, we had Alex at Sense on, they provide software to laundromats, right?
Yeah. Car washes. Yeah. You name it.
So some of those I think will exist. But I think from a banking perspective, the first point is that it's really hard. This is not a bolt-on project that you just like, oh, cool, let's get like, 2 engineers and we'll just integrate this and it'll just spit out money. That's really not how banking and payments works. It's all about like handling edge cases exceptionally well. At Rho, we built all our technical infrastructure from the ground up. We started with a BaaS solution. We found its limitations very quickly. And then we're like, hey, like if we don't build our own core infrastructure, we're gonna, maybe we upgrade to the next generation of BaaS, but we're gonna have the same problem again and again and again. And ultimately the customers and the scale of customers that we're trying to service are not gonna be happy with our solution. So we believe that's really critical if you're gonna deliver a solution to companies that, depend on you, frankly, to survive, right? So first of all, it's hard. Second is that the problems are pretty universal. The CFO at that company, a tech company, and the CFO at, let's say, like an architecture firm are actually struggling with a lot of the same things. How do I close the books? How do I make sure that, we understand, where our money's going faster? How do we ultimately, ensure that our bills are getting paid on time and that we're not getting vendor fraud and stuff like that? These are universal concepts that permeate industries. You can really think about it as like the CFO. The finance person is actually the industry, right? And then there's like verticals that kind of intersect that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the finance professional is really all of them, 100% of them are trying to close their books faster. 100% of them are trying to have less software to juggle on a single platform. 100% of them, want to be able to have the best banking solution in the world, be able to talk to somebody if they need to, and if they don't, like be able to just do everything online. So yeah, from our perspective, that's really the industry. And then the vertical is just, kind of subsets of that.
Yeah.
What about from a go-to-market standpoint? I mean, it's such a wide ICP.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of risk going after startups.
Yeah.
And you want people, like, as they're starting their company to think of Rho.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that from a go-to-market?
So I think that's where we get probably a little bit more vertical is like when we go to market, because you're right, like it's harder to hit the whole market at once. And that's sort of the challenge in this space is you can get sort of wide-eyed and start to boil the ocean really quickly if you don't narrow it down. But I think it's important to remember that, hey, like this whole market does exist. If we want to focus our attention here, we can focus it here or here. And so we really do a lot of like, just like in product management, and the go-to-market side, what's the most important category? What's the most important segment? Where can we drive the highest, return on effort, return on investment in terms of bringing customers to Rho?
Yeah.
We do a lot with tech companies of all stages. We've done a ton here in New York City, and we're doing more in San Francisco actually starting next year. And we do a lot with accountants. It's really been a critical category for us that then spans a lot of categories. For us, we've set the path on trying to be the best partner in the market. We're not the biggest firm by headcount. We're not trying to grow through headcount either. So what we're trying to do is really to develop super high leverage partnerships with great organizations like Navan, who we partnered with a year ago, and really work towards shared goals and help them deliver to their customer promise and help us deliver the best banking and card and spend management product in the world alongside the products that they're selling. And that's been really successful so far. And that's helped us span, across a number of industries.
Yeah. What do you think Rho looks like in 2030?
2030 is not that far away, right? It's 5 years. It's kind of crazy. But I think our long-term aspiration is that we're building one of the largest financial institutions in the United States. And we're building it because we're not a financial institution. We're a tech company, right? But in terms of scale, in terms of size, in terms of number of customers touched, we really believe that is possible, that will happen in fintech, and we want to be the ones that do that. We have a better product than the incumbents, like bar none. So to me, it's inevitable. The first customer, the first 10 customers, first 100 customers, 1,000, that's the hardest part, right? Now it's just how do we rinse and repeat? How do we scale? How do we get that to 1 million? How do we get that to every business in America? But we believe that's ultimately where this goes. And we're excited to kind of spend the next, I don't know if it's 5 years or longer, but spend that time period getting there.
Yeah.
Should
very fascinating.
we end with a quick fire round?
Sure.
Okay, so if you weren't CEO at Rho, what would you do for work?
I don't know. I'd probably be trying to find another interesting problem to solve.
Okay.
What's the third step in starting a business?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What's one thing you would tell yourself if you could go back to day one of starting Rho?
So believe in yourself more, right? Like I think that as a founder, especially a first-time founder, you think about all the things you don't know. What you don't realize is that nobody really has those answers. And if you just, are more confident and push harder, you will go faster.
What is your favorite iOS app?
Perplexity, for sure.
Why?
It makes you smarter. It's an amazing product. It's the best.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's the source of all like human knowledge accumulated over millennia in an app. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's really good. Actually, OpenAI's real-time search is getting much better.
That's
Just
true.
a
Yeah.
side tangent. What's one book recommendation?
One of my favorite books is this book called The Art of Learning, which is about a chess player, but really it's about like how to solve hard problems and how to think about problems that you've never sort of solved before. I read it when I was a portfolio manager, and it was really, really impactful as I made the transition.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on and chatting about Rho. And obviously, if you're listening, check them out if you're starting a business.
That's right, rho.co. And happy to support all founders. We have a ton of perks for companies just getting started.